welcome. It's
Thank
nice
you.
to see you.
Thank you, Tom. Great to be with you.
You're a political newcomer. This is your first run for office. So for many viewers, this is really the first time they're meeting you. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running for Congress?
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity. So I'm Matt Castelli. I'm running for Congress here in the 21st Congressional District against Elise Stefanik. I'm an upstate New York guy, born and raised. Went to college in upstate at Siena, not too far away from the southern portion of the district. And 20 years ago when I was in college, 9/11 happened. That became a driving force for my career. I spent much of my career at the CIA doing counterterrorism work. I led teams hunting down some of the world's most dangerous terrorists, served in Afghanistan and Iraq, and had enough success doing all of that I was tapped by the Obama White House to come down and serve as the director for counterterrorism at the National Security Council, a role that I was then asked by the Trump administration to stay on in, and I did for the first year of the Trump White House. Because if I learned anything during my career of public service, it's this, that when it comes to protecting this country, to protect our community, my country, your country, my family and yours, it requires us to put country before party, and my belief in that has never wavered. Now, after that, I worked in, when COVID hit, we got to a point pretty quickly where we were having a 9/11 every single day in this country in terms of deaths. And so I left government and I joined a healthcare organization. Started here in New York, founded by a couple of veterans to better coordinate care for veterans and rural communities by connecting health and social care together. Really transformational work. I loved what I was doing. But then January 6th happened. And as you might imagine, former counterterrorism guy who spent a career trying to prevent things like that from happening in foreign capitals, to see it happen in our own did not sit well with me. But certainly then too, the response from Congresswoman Stefanik, how she turned her back on our democracy. I think she violated her oath to the Constitution. And so we launched this campaign not long after that in order to uphold my oath to the Constitution, to support and defend it against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
So January 6th, was that really what led you to run for office?
Real tipping point for me, but I think it's born out of this also recognition, a strong recognition, that we need a representative who is going to put country before party, who's going to focus on our safety, security, and strength. And that's what our campaign is focused on. The divisiveness, the division, the extremism that we're seeing in our politics that's preventing us from tackling the real world challenges that working families are facing right now. Rising costs of daily life, gas prices, climate change. We need folks who are going to come together and address the many challenges facing our community, and I'd like to be a part of that solution.
So why New York's 21st District?
So I relocated up here after, during the pandemic when I was working in healthcare, to relocate back up to upstate New York. And so I live in Glens Falls. This is now my home, and sought to challenge Congresswoman Stefanik in the aftermath of seeing what she did on January 6th.
Congresswoman Stefanik is seeking a fifth term. She won easily with nearly 60% of the vote 2 years ago. She has become a powerful force, rising up to the leadership in the House, the third highest ranking Republican in the U.S. House. She and her supporters say that carries a lot of clout for the North Country and the people that she represents here. She is a formidable opponent, so why take her on?
Well, I'm not sure she's actually doing a good job for the North Country and for the 21st Congressional District. And if we look at her record of service during those 8 years that she's been in Congress, she's only gotten 2 bills passed into law from sponsorship to passage. One was a commemorative coin, the other a renaming of a post office. And so while she has certainly been successful in advancing her own career, she's done it at the expense of our community and our district. And we deserve someone who's going to fight for us. Someone who is actually going to fight for our interests, not her interests. We deserve someone who's going to fight for our future, not their future. And that's why it's important for us to take on Congresswoman Stefanik, to have a representative who's going to put country and community first. The only agenda that's ever mattered to Congresswoman Stefanik is Stefanik first.
And has she changed in particular this past term?
I think especially. And that's what you're hearing from voters across the political spectrum, not just from Democrats, but independents and Republicans as well, who have seen her opportunism really translate into extremism. And she has put her own ambition at the expense, ahead of and at the expense of our community. And so this is a big change for folks. Folks who first voted for her many, many years ago did so, I think, under the impression that she was going to be a representative for all of us, that she was going to maybe buck the partisanship, that she might be a moderate. But she has certainly changed her tune in recent years, and certainly since the 2020 election.
The makeup, as you mentioned, of the 21st District has changed with redistricting. The final version, the newly redrawn district, is now made up of 15 counties, including Montgomery, Schoharie, Fulton. Watertown is no longer part of the 21st, half of Jefferson County. So the district has really changed, but the bottom line is there is still a significant Republican advantage in voter enrollment. So if you win this primary where the Democrats are voting and move on to November, How do you take on such a strong Republican advantage like that?
Well, we've started already. This is not something we're waiting to win the Democratic primary to do. Winning here in the district requires you to build a coalition. As you point out, the registration advantage, it's about 40% of registered voters here are registered Republicans. And they're not a monolith. There are many independent-minded folks, many moderate Republicans who I think are turned off by Congresswoman Stefanik's extremism and don't feel that they have a home in her version of the Republican Party. They certainly have a home in our campaign. And we're building a coalition. I'm encouraged by having the unanimous support of the Democratic Party across the 15 counties that make up this district now. But it's not just turning out every single Democrat. It's also building that coalition that includes the many independents. 30% of registered voters here are independents or unaffiliated. We need to build a coalition. And our Country Before Party campaign and the utilization of this wonderful thing that we were able to accomplish, we have a second line on the ballot called the Moderate Party. We're not just running as a Democrat, we're also running as a moderate party candidate to build that coalition, a coalition to bring on board those Republicans and independents that want to seek someone who's going to push back against the divisiveness and the extremism and actually focus on common sense solutions for our community.
So if you lose the Democratic primary, though, will you still run on that third party line, on that moderate party line?
I have every intention of working my tail off in order to win this Democratic primary.
So a lot of people would say that sets up the potential, if you lose the primary, of a three-way race with you and Mr. Putorti potentially splitting the vote and perhaps guaranteeing Ms. Stefanik a win.
I have every intention of winning the Democratic primary. And for folks who are showing up in the Democratic primary, either on August 13th for early voting or August 23rd, the primary day, if you'd like your candidate to carry both party lines forward, the Democratic Party line and the moderate party line, make sure to vote for Castelli.
So what are the biggest issues for you, your priorities? What do you plan to focus on?
Listen, they're drawn from what I hear from the community. I've had the good fortune of being in the community in all 15 counties. We're working tirelessly to talk with voters across the political spectrum. We put 35,000 miles on my truck. We've had town halls. We've had listening tours. We're talking with voters. And what I hear from folks is that working families are having a hard time with the rising costs of daily life. We want to make sure we're reducing those costs. We're hearing about challenges with respect to access to care. And that's not just about how we pay for health care, it's how do we find it. We have clinics closing left and right. We have workforce shortages. We need to be able to fix that. I hear from seniors who are concerned about the threat to Medicare and Social Security. They're concerned about the rising cost of prescription drugs. We want to address that. We also want to make sure that we're making investments in our community to help grow our economy. But there's also this undercurrent of a real threat of this extremism that we see from Congresswoman Stefanik that's eroding American freedoms, like a woman's right to choose, a woman's right to control her own body and make her own health care decisions. These are things that voters are looking for a fighter to help protect.
And just to pick right up on that, should Congress pass a federal law to legalize abortion?
Absolutely. Yeah, unequivocal. Because that's the only way that's actually going to protect against this threat of against millions of American women throughout this nation.
Many voters say for them it's the economy. Inflation at a 40-year high, as you mentioned, prices at the gas pump, filling up your pickup truck, in the grocery store. Lots of folks worried we may be heading into a recession, if not already there. How much of this do you blame on President Biden? Was the administration slow in addressing the dramatic rise in inflation?
I'm going to say yes, they were. That's something that, listen, true to form, Country Before Party, I'm always going to point out criticisms that I believe are true of this president or any president. And so I think that they were too slow to respond and to recognize that inflation was a key challenge. Now, they're instituting some responses to that right now, but we need to understand what caused the inflation that we're now seeing. It's a global challenge. It's not a unique American challenge. I'll also take my former CIA hat off and put my business school hat on. I went to Northwestern got an executive MBA there. The challenge we're seeing right now with rising costs is due to a severe imbalance of supply and demand. Demand is high, but supply side hasn't picked up in the aftermath of being cratered during the pandemic. That's where there are opportunities for us to address inflation, are on the supply side, fixing our supply chains, making sure that they begin and end here at home, creating good paying jobs for folks. We have had opportunities on a legislative basis to actually address some of these things, but Congresswoman Stefanik has stood in the way time and time again, just including right now, very recently with this CHIPS Act, which is a good opportunity for us to create good paying union jobs here in the district, but she's opposed. Now, this is a concern that I think many Americans recognize, that we see folks like Congresswoman Stefanik who would allow American pain to benefit their political fortunes rather than addressing the problems that we face.
Where are you on gun control? Do you support the measures passed by Congress after the shootings in Buffalo and Texas?
Yeah, so this is a key challenge that we're now facing, certainly in the aftermath of Buffalo and Texas. And it requires us to come together. There's an opportunity right now, and I think we're seeing a coalition that's coming forward. As we talked about, my career has been spent protecting this country. There's no higher priority for me than protecting our kids and our communities, certainly from rising gun violence. And it requires a coalition to actually deal with this. Now, those of us who support the Second Amendment and lawful gun owners agree with those who want to protect our kids and communities about keeping any firearm out of the hands of someone that's going to do themselves or others harm. There's an opportunity there to really focus on common sense solutions around robust universal background checks, red flag laws. And this is an area where we can continue to maintain that coalition and bring to bear some real solutions to help protect our kids and our communities.
Would you support a ban on assault weapons?
So this is, again, another area where we want to focus on keeping that coalition together. One of the opportunities we have is about focusing on any firearm and keeping that out of the hands of someone that's going to do themselves or others harm. This is where we can keep that coalition together. My concern is that when we put forward other measures, we may lose that coalition that is required in this moment of urgency. And that's what we have on our hands right now, is a moment where we are expected. Government's top responsibility is to protect its citizens from particularly the harms that we now see. In order for us to meet that moment, we have to have that coalition brought to bear on it.
We talked about abortion. Roe being overturned has led to calls to expand the Supreme Court, add up to maybe 4 more justices. Others are calling for term limits. Would you support either of those?
Certainly, I think term limits are an area where we want to look into, or an age limit, or whatever it might be. I also think we should look into term limits for members of Congress as well.
How long?
For particularly the House, I would say 8 years. I think we've seen right now what happens at the 8-year mark with someone like Congresswoman Stefanik, who's really embraced her own political career at the expense of our community. And so I think we would otherwise prevent her from running in this cycle right now if we had an 8-year limit on Congress.
Let me ask you about your opponent in the Democratic primary. What separates you from Mr. Putorti? Why are you a better choice?
Well, I think I'm the only candidate that can defeat Elise Stefanik. I'm also the only candidate that can build the coalition that's necessary to win. We've already talked a little bit about this. It's not just the unanimous support that I've received from the Democratic Party across the 15 counties, and I'm honored to have received that, and the support from folks like Bill Owens, who used to represent this district, but it's also about bringing on board those independents and those Republicans. And that's the work that we've been doing from the start of this campaign. I'm confident in our ability to execute upon that and to build that coalition that can win.
Matt Castelli, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Tom.